Hey guys, this is Saikat. Welcome back to my channel, Saikat's Tutorial. Today, we will talk about routing in Angular. In traditional applications built with server-side routing, when you change the URL in your browser, the browser makes a request to the server to return some HTML which it will display. But in Angular, we want to implement something called client-side routing. When we first navigate to a site, the server returns the HTML, compiled JavaScript, and CSS needed to render that page. All further changes to the URL are handled locally by the client application. There is only ever a single page returned from the server. All further modifications of the page are handled by the client, and that is why it is called a single page application or SPA. The advantage of using a single page application are the application can be faster because from the first load onwards it loads only partial pages. Secondly, the application needs less bandwidth. And thirdly, convenience. Now a single developer can build most of the functionality of a site instead of splitting the effort between a front-end and server-side developer. Now, in Angular, we can have two different routing strategies. One is path location strategy, which is the default one. Another one is hash location strategy. In our example, when we created the application using command ng new app name space --routing, that time this app -routing.module.ts file was generated. Now in that file, if I pass this object with this property use hash true, then Angular will use hash location strategy for routing. URL can contain some data prepended with a hash character. It is normally used so that people can link to a particular section in a HTML page, specifically anchor tags. Now if we see our example, you will find the hash character in our URL when we navigate between different components. Another important characteristic of having hash in the URL is that anything past the hash in the URL never gets sent to the server. Alright, now if we want to use path location strategy for routing, then we don't have to do anything special here because path location strategy is the default strategy for routing in Angular. Alright, now let's focus on app-routing.module.ts file. As you can see, here we have several import statements. We are importing ng module decorator from Angular core and routes and router module from Angular router module. Here what we need to do is we need to create an array of routes. Each route object should have a path which we will try to access from the browser address bar. Component is another property of routes object. Here when we mention the component name, that means when we access this test from the URL, that time this test component will be executed. Now in ng module decorator we have imports and exports properties. In imports we want to import all the routes, but here you will notice we have used for route function. That means we want to make sure that all routes are attached to our route module so that it can be accessed from anywhere, and also for lazy loading it ensures that all providers are injected at runtime so that dependencies are injected properly. And in the export statement we are exporting our router module. Now if you see app.module.ts, we have injected that app routing module here in our import array. Now we need to add a directive called router outlet somewhere in our template HTML. This directive tells Angular where it should insert each of those components in the route. In our case, if you see app.component.html, we have used router outlet here so that if we navigate between different route, then the content of that component will be displayed over here only. In our routing, if we need to redirect some URL to another URL, that is also possible. Say for example, if we want to redirect dashboard in the URL to our test URL, then we have to write this property redirects to test. That means if I try to access dashboard from the URL, it will redirect me to test. Let's compile. Now see in the browser. /dashboard. Alright, so it took me to our test component. Now let's think, if we enter any invalid URL, then it should take me to a page not found page, right? So let's create one page not found component, and from that we will show a page not found or 404 if the URL is invalid. So the command would be nggc, then the component name page not found. Now the component has been created. Let's import that component. And then finally in our routes object we need to mention that path would be star star. That means any URL pattern other than these. So this object should be added at the very end of our routes array. Well, so if path is star star, then it should execute our page not found component. The code has been compiled. Now let's see in the browser. Invalid. Okay, so it is displaying that page not found. Now let's see how we can create these links in the HTML using our router. So as you can see in our router, we have used this router link directive that can be binded like this as well, and here you need to take an array and you need to mention the part of the URL. If this is a blank, then you can mention it as blank as the first item of the array. Now let's compile and see the link. Yeah, so it is working. Now convert the second one into data binding. The test URL. Okay, so now if you click on test, your test component will be rendered in the browser. Okay, fine. Now if you create any router with several parts like test, latest, then in your router link you can separate out all those parts. Now if you see the link here, yeah, so test/latest. The logic behind this array structure for the router link is, if you want to make any part dynamic by having some business logic, then you can use a variable as well here, right? So if I go to app component and if I add a part variable here and if I name it latest, that variable I'll be able to use here. Since it is a variable, I don't need to put it within single quotes. Now if you see the link, see test latest, that router has been activated. We have one more important directive here, router link active. Let me name this route as home and here as well. Okay, now what I want to do is, if I go to test or dashboard, then that menu item should be highlighted in a different color. I have a class active here, I have defined that, so the class would be dynamically added when I click onto that link. Now let me add router link active. So the directive router link active, then array of classes. For now I will add active class only. Same thing happens for test as well. Let me compile and see that in browser. Currently we have accessed test So the test URL is highlighted in red in our menu. Now clicking on dashboard. Now the dashboard is highlighted in the red. What does that mean is when we go to home, that time router link active will add active class, and same for test URL, right? If we want to navigate to a specific URL programmatically, then we can use router service. Let's take this example. In our dashboard component, first let's import the service from Angular router, the router service, and then let's take a variable of the type now. I'll create a goto function, and here I will use that router variable to navigate to a specific URL. So here we need to mention test/latest. Alright, now we just need to trigger goto event from our dashboard component. Let's create a button and let's write an event. The event should trigger goto function. Okay, now let's see how it works. Okay, so in our dashboard page we have this go to test button. Now clicking on that, yeah, it took me to our test URL. Now let's talk about parameterized routes. Sometimes we need part of the path in one or more of our routes to be variable, right? Let's create an example here. I want to pass some value in some URL, say news with some ID, and for that I need to create another component, ngGC news, okay, so news component has been created. Now let's import it here. And the component news component, right? So when we try to access news component, we will have this news in the path followed by some ID. That optional ID we can pass from URL, and that we can catch in our news component. Let me go to news component. Here we need to import activated route. Import from Angular router, activated route imported. Let's take a variable of the type Okay, now in our ng on init or in any function, we can access that parameter synchronously or asynchronously. So to catch that synchronously, what we need to do is this dot activated route dot snapshot dot params, and the params is an array where the id will be a property. Now I want to store it in a variable and want to display in the browser. Okay, so now see what is there in the id that I want to display in our news component. Okay, now let me type news slash 123456. Alright, so this id is displayed here. That means the component, the news component, is able to catch the id from the URL. So this is asynchronously this is synchronously catch. Now if we want to catch the id asynchronously, what we need to do is this dot route dot params dot subscribe. Yeah, we need to subscribe for our params. Now let's see what are there in params. Okay, and in this dot id we can write params id. Okay, so this is asynchronously fetched. Now if we refresh, you will see same. So based on your requirement, you can parse the id synchronously or asynchronously. Both options are available. Okay, so that is fine. Now in our news component, if we want to create a submenu which will have two different items for latest news and for archive news, then how we will do that, right? So in news component we will have two different components. That means we will have child components. So for that we need to implement child routing, right? So let's take this example. First let me create two more components, say latest under news component, and then upcoming under news component. Okay, so we have two child components here that we are going to map in our app routing. Okay, so here we need to add children's will be an array, and in similar fashion we have to add routes. So path, say latest. Okay, first we need to import those two components. Latest and upcoming Okay, so the latest I will add here, and for upcoming I will add the component here. Now let me add these two links here. Router link, and it will be linked to latest. Alright, similar way we'll add the upcoming URL. Okay, now where the content of these two routes will be displayed. So again we need to put a router outlet here. Okay, now let's see how this works. Alright, so this is our news component. Now if I click on latest, you will see latest works. If I click upcoming, upcoming works. Okay, so this is our child route. Now if you want to nest few more components under these child components, that is also possible. You just need to configure in the same fashion that we have done here, and those links that you can put in here are relative, right? So you don't need to mention the parent router here, rather it would take the latest URL. Alright, so that's it for today. If you have any question, you can post your comment here, and if this helps you, then please don't forget to like, share, and also subscribe to my channel to get latest updates. Thank you guys, thanks for watching, bye bye.